Ian Priest. Is Ian available, since we are a little bit on the early side now?
Yeah, I saw him before.
Yeah, no, I'm here, Sandra. I'm here.
Right. Have we got all the councillors?
I can't see Martin.
Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a Zoom, is it?
Yeah.
Just having another quick look down. Right, so so we've still got 2 minutes. So who was that? Is that Martin? Is that you, Martin, by any chance? No.
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, then we're going to start with Ian Priest, whose submission is on page 356 of the hard copy, or page 368. So for those of you that have joined us, this hearing is about you doing your presentation, then the councillors having an opportunity to ask you some questions. And so we begin with Ian Priest. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. Thanks for the chance to talk to the council.
Appreciate Ian, just a moment. For the others of you, do you want to mute your video and mics, please, in the interim? So, okay. So, Ian. Oh, you don't need to, Ian, because you're up.
I'm back on again. I'm back up. Okay. So yeah, first of all, to the council, thanks for the opportunity to speak. As I sent my submission in, I'm not going to run through it. I just wanted to make 3 points, and I guess in advance, if it does sound slightly pointed, I guess it's because there's a degree of frustration, and none of that's clearly personal at all, aimed at anybody. But there is a fair degree of frustration with the situation around the rates rise. I suppose before I come on to the points I want to make, I just want a little bit of background about myself. Is for the people who do know me, I'm known as a photographer. That's the business I run here, which interestingly, due to the lockdown, has kind of dried up completely, which won't be a unique situation for many business owners in the area. And also I was running the Art Escape last year. That's how people know about me. My kind of background ahead of that, before that, was a commercial program manager. And I've done a lot of infrastructure builds for corporations. And actually, since my photography dried up, I've gone back to that. And I'm currently working with one of New Zealand's largest construction companies. We did with NZTA on the road build work at the moment. I'll just wait a sec.
Bruce, could you please mute your... Bruce Gilbert, could you please mute your screen?
I'll do it now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Sorry, Ian.
No, it's fine, Sandra. Thanks. So yeah, just saying in summary, I've spent a lot of years.
Okay.
Yeah, mute your microphone. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all right. We're all learning on this one. Sorry, Ian.
Yeah.
You can have a bit more time.
Once more with feeling. Okay. So I
you got to the point where you were saying you work for a big construction company.
That's right. So I'm doing a piece of work at the moment, which is around operating model design, looking at forecasts for next year, growth models, and obviously the COVID lockdown is a factor there. And I guess the point for raising that is I'm familiar with forecasting processes. I'm familiar with risk-based analysis, variance analysis, probability curves. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to come on the call, because of my concerns from what I've seen. So I suppose I just wanted to make 3 points, really all linked to trust and confidence.
You've muted your mic, Ian. Thank you. Your mic. Oh, thank you. You're right. You're back again.
All right. So
you got to the point. You said you wanted to make 3 points.
3 points. That's right. And they all link to the same thing, and it's a trust and confidence question. So the first question is, looking at what is a significant rise in the rates and reading the consultation documents, there's more to come. And I've read the proceedings from the various meetings and the reports that have come through from the former. So what it looks like a significant and structural issue with the finances on a protracted basis. And I suppose my first point is linked to the election. So in my experience, significant changes in budgets don't happen overnight. And I suppose one question, and this may seem pointed, apologies if it does, is for the council is, I find it hard to believe this issue wasn't known about going into the election. So a question would be, running into the elections, were the council aware of the projected rises? If so, why weren't they raised? Because that's a question of transparency. And if they weren't known about, an issue like that should have been, which raises another question of trust. So I think it draws the line for me around faith, I think. And again, apologies, that sounds pointed, but I think it does raise a trust question. The second point, which is connected to that, is about the significance of the issue. So if I was running an assurance deep dive on a program, and I've done a number of them, if I was looking at a change of this scale, there are kind of three things you ask. The first thing is, what is the root cause? Because unless you get to the bottom of that, you can't fix it. The second thing is, what is the plan to address that? And the third point would be, is the team that I've got in front of me the right people to fix it? And often, and I've been in this situation, the incumbents often may well not be. That isn't the point I want to make today. But what I see with the root cause, having again looked at the consultation documents, the comments made in there just don't give me confidence that we've got to the bottom of what the real issue with the finances are. Now, I don't have party to the numbers. I wouldn't expect a consultation document to explain all that in detail. But I think there is an outstanding question about, why is there such a variance? Why is that variance expected to last so long? And why am I not seeing that in other councils around the country? So the second point is a trust issue around fixing the problem. And the third and final point is really around timing. It's a really unbelievable time to be making this change. And we've even seen our central government take salary cuts. Sure, they get paid a lot of money in the first place, but they are doing that. It just doesn't take into account at all the kind of challenges people are going to go through. Like I said, my own photography business is grinding to a halt, and a lot of other people are, other people's businesses will be. I just think in terms of the faith of the ratepayers and trust in that point, it just seems very, I have to use the word high-handed actually, and lacking empathy and understanding to be making those changes now. I do appreciate, in wrapping up, that there is no constitutional vehicle to make a change to the council. If there were, I'd be pursuing that. But I do think in terms of trust, reputation, I do think this will be remembered for a long time by the ratepayers. And I guess the next elections are in 2.5 years. And I'm only here to speak for myself, but a lot of people in my community I talk to are really unhappy about this and really don't understand. So whatever the reasons are we're doing this, I don't think they've been properly communicated. And I just think that question of trust and confidence, I think will be a significant issue and legacy issue for this council. So they're my points. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
So thank you very much, Ian, and I appreciate your tolerance of all the little hiccups that we had with the process. Are there any questions from the councillors? There being none, thank you, Ian.
Sandra Murray here.
Right.
I just want to make a comment when I read Ian's last paragraph, and he's talking about the impact of COVID-19. Just remind Ian that these forecasts were all done before we knew anything about COVID at all. So we went out with a discussion document before any of this was known. So obviously, and I absolutely agree with Ian, the ground has changed quantum since this was actually written.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sandra.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, now call the next submitter, Nigel Billings, on behalf of Federated Farmers the Thames-Coromandel Federated Farmers of New Zealand, our food producers. Gilbert, Nigel, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Your Worship.
The screen is yours, Nigel.
These are interesting and challenging times, and I just wanted to I'm a policy advisor with Federated Farmers and had a bit to do with the written submission. These are extraordinary times, and I just wanted, on behalf of any farmers that contacted your business response unit or economic development unit in those early days of going into lockdown, and there was a great deal of confusion about what could and couldn't have been done. And we had a service that was getting on its feet too, and we know how hard it was. And we appreciated Council's efforts in that regard. And we also get that this plan and the groundwork for it and the numbers were laid out before lockdown, before the full impact of COVID-19 was known. You will guess that we're opposing the rate increase, the rate revenue increase at 10%. We do acknowledge that Council has been very tight on rate increases in the past, and it's worthy of a bouquet that Thames has got pretty good rep within Federated Farmers as a council that sticks to its knitting. But these are extraordinary times, and we would like to see Council do more with its balance sheet, whether that's through the LGFA, to basically reduce that cash cost. It's our view, and we find it extraordinary that central government has not reformed local government funding for successive generations, leave you poor people tied to your property value rates, trying to respond in a crisis. We would argue, given the limitations on the funding side, the best that you can do for your community is to lower costs, particularly in the short to medium term, and reduce that cash cost of rates on ratepayers where you possibly can by going through the budget line item by line item. I would add also that some of the cost drivers may change that were mapped out in the consultation document prior to COVID. We're pushing hard. We know Three Waters is big. It's quite extraordinary what's going on there. We're involved in the community water supply side. We see this huge wall of costs coming. We're hoping that government shows some good sense and defers some of those reforms or engages in a revenue share with council so that they can adapt to that new regulation. MPS and Indigenous biodiversity is another example of a really pricey number that is being dumped on local communities. So we really hope that central government puts its money where its mouth is, talks all the time about empowering local government and local communities, yet all we ever see is contestable funds and the PGF and lolly scrambles. We're really hoping that they will join with local government, partner, remit rates, rebates, given that we're in an emergency situation, etc. Please get that 10% down in the interests of your community. And just lastly, on the specific consultation question around the UAGC predictable response, we choose option C. We think the uniform annual general charge should be as high as possible, that services, as is stated in your previous funding documents, there are numerous council services that benefit people equally, regardless of their property value, size or type, and that lowering the UAGC just has the effect of pushing the rate increase onto a smaller group of higher valued properties. And that option produces quite big cash rate increases for farms. Farming and horticulture will be really important for the district going forward. So we would value it if you kept the UAG the same or increased it. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Look, can I just say a big thumbs up to our food producers who do an awesome job. And I just want to pick up on one of the points you made in your submission, the biodiversity national policy statement. And you mentioned that there was going to be a big cost on local government as a result of that. Have you idea of the quantum of costs that might exist for the Thames-Coromandel District and where that might be, how that might be being put, you know, what that requirement will be?
Oh, no, look, not specifically. Our knowledge is mainly anecdotal around,
Right.
you know, the requirements to develop significant natural areas and outstanding natural landscapes, and just what people in local government are telling us in terms of the cost of that on the ground and of meeting the demands of that national policy statement. And we just feel that it's kind of outrageous to set up, you know, a national policy statement by definition as national objectives, and government should be supporting you guys with funding in that regard if they're going to push ahead with it at the pace that they plan to.
Do you think they should also be assisting councils with funding for the emission, the onus of meeting emissions targets and climate change criteria?
Absolutely. We have a very long held view that property value rates are a very narrow funding base. We get that central government is happy to plan national standards and national objectives. They leave it to councils to try and implement them and bear the cost. And to us, that is a transfer of cost from taxpayer to ratepayer. So it's an easy thing for Parliament. And that must at some point be corrected if New Zealand is going to go forward successfully, if our local communities, if local government is to play the role that central government wants. And certainly for the climate change response, that should not just be the responsibility of landowners, that's the responsibility of all New Zealanders. And central government having an income tax and a sales tax and the ability to print money and everything else should certainly come to the party in that regard.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions of Nigel? There being none, thank you very much, Nigel. We really appreciate you being with us this morning.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank
I
you very much
appreciate it.
indeed.
Okay.
Take care.
Sandra, can you hear me?
I can, Gary.
Yeah, suddenly my laptop died or something happened, and so I'm listening on my cell phone.
Oh, right.
I
Okay.
don't know what happened. It did come up
if-
saying my battery was low and then it died. So I'm trying to
you
get hold of
at
my
Whangamata?
computer guy, but I can listen on my cell phone. Thank you.
Okay. Are you in Whangamata?
No, I'm in Auckland.
Okay.
Essential services person. I came back for some gang wars.
Okay. No, that's fine. So if you're okay with that, Gary, that's
Yeah,
good.
it's all I can do, and I'm happy with it. Okay, thank you. I can watch on my screen all the people who are making submissions.
Okay. And then if you've got any questions, you just ask them ask them on your mobile.
Okay, thank you so
because we
much.
can't hear you. So Richard Rowley, page 57. Richard, welcome.
Hello. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Can you hear me?
Exactly. Go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. I don't usually do this sort of thing, but I, as you possibly know, am a business consultant these days and have been for some years. I was chief executive of 3 large law firms, not at the same time. And so I have quite a good background in governance and working to budget. What I noted, of course, and you've all talked already about, is that the circumstances have dramatically changed from when you started to go through this process. And I don't envy you the challenge of having to manage your way through that for this next year. However, I wanted to start by telling you a little story. When I was in Scotland some years ago, we got lost in a rental car and we stopped on the side of the road and talked to a farmer and we said, we're wanting to go to Edinburgh. And he said, well, if I were you, I wouldn't be starting here. And we said, oh, okay, but where are we? Because we're lost. And we pulled out the map and showed it to him and he said, well, I can't read, so I can't tell you on the map where you are. So we eventually found that if we drove back to a village, we could get onto the map and know where we were. And then we could find our way to where we wanted to be. And I suspect that the council are now in that sort of situation. You first of all have to decide where you are. And that's quite challenging at the moment. One of the things you can say is, well, we were elected to look after the council business. The council business requires more cash flow per annum than we're currently taxing, and we're entitled to charge more, so we're going to do that. And it's a straightforward thing. We see that as the best option. I counsel against that, and the reason I do that is for the reason that I think you could come up with a plan B. And the plan B, if I take you through it, would look something like this. The first thing you would do is you would review, as the last speaker just said, line by line, your procurement strategies and contracts and activities, and seek to reduce the cost of your modus operandi without necessarily stopping the delivery of essential services at all. Now, you might find that a strange proposition, but I worked for a company called Management Toolbox Limited, and about 10 years ago, we did exactly this project for the Wellington City Council, and we reduced their costs quite significantly, which meant that they did not have to increase the rates at that time by the amount that they had planned. So there is a precedent, and there is an opportunity, in my opinion, for you to look at that. So part of Plan B, the first stage, I would encourage you to do is to have a look at that. The second point that I wanted to make was that the management of large businesses that I've been associated with, the reason you have a budget isn't just for the fun of having a budget. It's actually a key critical way of measuring success. And the executive team that you employ, what would normally happen in the private sector would be that a percentage of their remuneration would be paid only if they achieved their budget. And there needs to be a real focus and accountability for achieving budget. I mean, I'm apparently you guys were in a situation where you did the town upgrade here in Whitianga, expecting to get a couple of $1 million from a central government agency, which didn't work. And my question is, how did the executive go ahead with that project when they didn't have the funding secured? And you can't be casual about sticking to your budget, and there have to be consequences, and somebody needs to be held accountable. The third stage of my proposition is that you have to stop what I would call pork barreling. I don't know if you know that expression, but the definition of it is that you tax people generally, but you pay for specific services that the general community can't enjoy. And typically it's done to support the re-election of the politician. And it's an expression I suspect came from America, but pork barreling is something that I think your council does. I see little projects being funded which are really not for the benefit of the whole community. And as I said in my submission, and with a couple of them, it seemed to me you're competing with the private sector. And I would have thought you'd have some principles and policies that say that we're not going to do that. The fourth thing I wanted to suggest was timing. I was going to suggest that rather than 10% this year, you should do 2% per annum for the next 5 years, and you should publicise that so that the community knows that each year the rates value cost is going to go up by 2%, and commit to working inside that budget. And I suspect that if you looked at each of the 4 steps that I've talked about, you would not have to do the 10% increase. And to make things more complicated, I suspect you shouldn't do it this year anyway because of the COVID-19 repercussions. I read that some of your councillors think that it's a bit over the top for us to be objecting when it's really just a cup of coffee per week. What I'd like you to consider is this: a lot of your ratepayers are what you call fixed income retirees. The Reserve Bank have actually made it clear that their fixed income has reduced substantially because the interest rates charged or paid to investors and savers is now very, very small after tax. My view is that a ratepayer would need to invest $150,000 at their bank at the moment to cover the cost of their annual rates. A 10% increase, therefore, would mean another $15,000 needs to be invested to cover that cost. And because you have a lot of ratepayers who are retirees and fixed income people, it's a reality that you need to take into account. You're a very fortunate council in some ways because you have growth, you have a large city within a driving distance, and therefore you have a lot of people buying property and paying full rates, although they only seek services for about 2 months a year. On the other hand, you have the disadvantage of being a tourist attraction, and all these people come to your region but don't contribute to the cost of the services that they expect. So I appreciate that it's not a simple calculation. The other point I wanted to cover was the split between the general rate and the UAGC. It's hard to ask the public to comment on that because obviously there will be a group of people who are at the higher property end of the market who will say you should go to a 20/80 split. And there'll be a group of people who are at the lower property end of the market who say the 30/70 split is fine. And there'll be some who say it should be even less. So my proposition there is that there needs to be a discussion about why it wouldn't be a 20/80 split. There needs to be some principle that you explain as to why you think that's appropriate. And the principle needs to relate to what's best for the community, not just trying to be nice to people who have lower value properties. Because my view is that a lot of people with lower value properties are still earning and they have an income, whereas a lot of people with more valuable properties don't have income. I've spoken to several small businesses that I do some work for in your watershed, if you like, who are considering leaving this area. They're considering leaving it because the rates they pay in Auckland are less per $100,000 than the rates they pay here. Now, I haven't checked that, but that's what they tell me. They're also saying because of the impact of a shortage of water and because of the cost of travel from Whitianga to Kopu, both time-wise and increased courier service fees, they're looking at moving out of this district. I'm really just raising that flag because I think that's really, really bad for your community. So thank you very much, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate your submission and thought it was a good one. So I'd invite anybody to ask any questions. Actually, before I do, can I just ask, you made mention about the nice to haves and, you know, the other, just doing an assessment of what we really need, etc. How do you feel about the skate park going ahead for Mercury Bay?
It's not about, well, see, I think the challenge for me is to understand what data, what what is the background information that you've collected that makes you consider that to be a good idea? And I don't know enough to be able to have a judgment about it. But I'm not quite open to the possibility that it's a good idea. I don't know.
So there's 400,000 required to be budgeted for that. An additional 200,000 has been raised by the community, the young people and the community, totaling about 600,000. So those are the sorts of questions that we will have to answer as we decide on what's nice to have.
The problem I see with that is at the moment, you've been overwhelmed by a COVID-19 pandemic. So I would have thought that the timing of it might be the biggest issue at the moment, rather than whether you do it or not.
Thank you. Sorry about that interruption. Are there any other questions of Richard?
Yes, I have a question, Sandra.
Robin, yep.
Richard, I'm interested in that, this isn't a derogatory thing, that the anecdotal evidence of those businesses that are wanting to or are looking to shift.
Yes.
Are we talking about the small sort of medium size? Are we talking about people who are working, have their businesses at their homes? Can you just give us a general idea of that, or are we talking about industry?
We're talking about there's not one, there's about three that I talk to a lot. You'll be pleased to know I do it pro bono. So probably my advice is worth what they pay for it.
I'll be giving you a call later.
Exactly. One of them's a manufacturer. One of them's in the food industry, and one of them is a consultancy sort of business. And two of them have rented properties, and the other one operates from their own home.
Okay,
they all employ staff.
Yeah, that was the other question that I wanted to get at. So thank you.
That's one of their big challenges here too, is that staff, the sort of staff they want, struggle to find suitable accommodation.
Okay, any other questions? There have been none. Thank you very much, Richard. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to some pro bono.
Excellent. Righto.
Thank you very much indeed. We now have Ian Stewart, page 14. Ian, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Welcome, Ian. The screen is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Richard that was just on, wasn't it? Yeah. Richard actually covered some of the points that I was going to cover quite succinctly, so I'll try and skip over those. I just have a few points now, just to give you the 10-cent tour of my background. I'm an analyst by trade, now semi-retired, and I live in Whitianga, have done for quite some time. I just wanted to, and I'm speaking purely as a ratepayer on a fixed income at the moment. The rates themselves are, I think it's been quite clearly pointed out by the people that I've listened to so far. The timing, obviously, with COVID-19 is not good for anybody in the country, particularly small business owners, people on fixed incomes. People on fixed incomes, it's not a good time anyway, but with business and all that sort of thing being quiet. So that point's been covered. The rates themselves are a significant part, even at their current setting, are a significant part of a household's expenditure, particularly for people on fixed incomes, but also for a large number of people working on the peninsula on very low or minimum wages. So that in itself has got to be taken into account, I think, in considering this option for a 10% pay and rates increase. What I was going to look at, what I was going to suggest is that, and I think again Richard covered this, revisit what you're actually doing with the rates. It's really nice for the council to be able to support the arts, to be able to support food parcels, business promotions and tourism. But these are things that are all covered under government grants anyway. And in this time, do we need to be putting money towards them? Richard very well covered business KPIs. Now, I've worked in industry, in a wide variety of industry, and KPIs were focused around performance and budget. And I think Richard's covered very well the fact that the administrators for the TCDC need to be given a budget. That budget needs to be realistic and they need to stay within it. And obviously the council at their meetings needs to be reviewing that budget performance for each department. And if that budget is getting blown out or is showing signs of getting blown out, that needs to be jumped on pretty quickly. And that's a standard across all private industry. A business cannot run at a deficit all the time because it becomes non-viable. The other points that I wanted to make are not so much a criticism, but just sort of suggesting to the council, maybe sort of look at more innovative thinking. Now I'm looking at things like the waste. We've got a problem, and I assume I've tried to get an answer out of the council information on plastic waste, which I know a little while ago was a very big issue because China has stopped taking plastic waste, and at one stage we had a massive stockpile of this. There are now systems available where plastic waste can be turned kilogram to litre, pretty much 100% conversion into viable and clean burning fuels. Now that's something that the council could perhaps investigate, not only for getting rid of our waste, but for making an income. It takes about 40% of the output from a plant like this to run the plant, and 60% can be profitable return to the council. Not only that, but you can actually charge other councils for disposing of their plastic waste. So right there, you've got you're getting rid of waste in a clean way. You're providing a cleaner burning fuel for trucks and vehicles, and you can actually make money out of it. It's something that I've had experience of in the past. I worked in the recycling industry in New Zealand for many years, and it's a very viable option. The other option, the other thing that I was looking at was the fact that at a council meeting in Whitianga recently, it was discussed that roading costs have gone up 16% simply because the roading companies can charge what they like because there's so much work around. Has the council considered combining purchasing power with other regional councils like Hauraki and is it Matamata or whatever it is? Combining your purchasing power and basically saying to the roading companies, well, hang on, we're not going to pay that. You bring your price down or you'll get nothing in the whole region, sort of thing. Don't let them dictate to you what their prices are, because you're the customer, and if they don't have work coming from you, well, they're going to have to come to the party. The other thing I was going to bring up was, again, this is probably a bit of a touchy subject, but Smart Environmental, which is obviously contracted to do waste disposal and all this sort of thing, or solid waste, but they also look after the parks and things like that. Now, why not keep that money within the community and use local contractors to look after the parks and public facilities, rather than spending the money in a company that's based in Tauranga? Keep the money within the community. It's great for the community. It promotes business. It helps people out in the community, and it keeps the money in house. That is pretty much where I'm going with it. I guess the core of what I'm saying is, as Richard said, reevaluate where that money is being spent. Obviously, in this particular time of the COVID-19, but this should be standard across the board anyway. Set a realistic budget and stay within that KPI. Now, The other thing I would suggest with the budget is that the nice to haves, the arts, the food parcels, business promotions, and new playgrounds for the kids, which was magnificent in Whitianga. I've got to say they did a fantastic job. But again, it was an outside company, I think, that actually did that. And it's a nice to have. I would say that anything like that in this particular time, and the skate park is one that you mentioned, is a real nice to have. It's been fundraised by the community and very successfully, but things like that at this particular time need to be put on hold. What I would be aiming at with a budget is look at your core services, work out a budget for them. If you have an excess, don't spend it until the next financial year. Now, if you have achieved your core services, sanitation, fresh water, roading, things like that, within that fiscal year's budget, and you have excess left over, firstly, that excess can be used in times of an emergency. If you've got a major roading slip, flooding, problems with water or sewerage or anything like that, you've got that excess there. If at the end of the financial year that excess is left over, that then can be targeted for the nice to have things like the skateboard park and other beautification of the town and things like that. But let's not spend it before we've actually got it. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Can I ask you a question? So do you think that community boards should have grants budgets to give money to community groups?
Well, again, it's a nice to have, and I think that is a very viable thing to do if that money is available at the end of the financial year. So, for instance, if you budget, and I'm just going to throw a figure in there for the sake of discussion, if your budget for income is $10 million and your essential services are $9 million, don't spend $1 million. Put it away until the next financial year when you're redoing your budget. If you've got $1 million, then that can be apportioned to the nice to have. But if we, in the meantime, have a massive flood, which involves unexpected costs for restoring infrastructure and everything like that, you've got the $1 million sitting there as a reserve for restoring those services.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Ian?
Yes, I've got a question, Murray here.
Mm.
Ian, can you just explain, we do an annual plan and based on that expenditure, we set our rates.
Mm-hmm.
So we do, and so that's our annual plan forms the budget.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, you said that we should be spending a budget and controlling our budget, and then you started talking about amounts left over. I don't actually quite get your submission.
Okay, well, all right. Well, to put it bluntly, your budget at the moment is blown out. So you've overspent it. At your annual meeting, what I'm saying is that you work out your budget for your core infrastructure. If you have an expected income.
Yeah, my point is that what we're told is we should be spending our budget because that's what we're rating on. And that's what we're going to the ratepayers on. I'll leave it at that.
No, I think you've completely missed the point. What you're budgeting is more than what your income is at the moment, obviously, because you're wanting to increase the rates by 10% to cover a budget blowout. What I'm saying is that your budget should be worked out on your expected or projected income. Okay. Now, what I'm saying is, don't commit that income. Don't commit all of that income. Because you're not allowing for any unexpected blowout costs. What I'm saying is, if you have an expected income from rates, and again, this is just an example figure, if you have an expected income of $10 million, don't budget for $10 million, budget your core costs. You know, that's staffing, roading, your basic health infrastructure, and then assuming that there is money left in the pot, which there must be because you're also, giving money to community services, things like that. Don't commit the money to community services until the following financial year, so that it's held in reserve.
Yeah. Those are all actually all included in the budget that we go out to rate for those sorts of things. They're all part of it. I think that's what Murray's trying to say. So look, we won't debate that point. I think we understand what you're trying to say, I think, Ian.
Yeah.
And be fully cognizant of that as we consider all the submissions during our deliberations. Are there any other questions of Ian? There being none. Look, thank you, Ian. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us this morning. I see you got your cross trainer there, is it?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I need to get on. I need to get on it after this lockdown too.
Awesome. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, thank you.
Okay, right. We'll go to Bruce Gilbert now, who's on page 110 of both copies. Bruce Gilbert. Bruce, are you with us?
Yes, hello, Mayor Sandra.
Hello.
Good morning.
You have the screen, Bruce.
I beg your pardon?
You have the screen.
That's kind, thank you. I'll just speak to my submission and thank you for this opportunity to do so. As you'll know, I'm a Tairua ratepayer and over my working life have overseen many plans and budgets of school boards and also significant trust boards. And you'll note in my submission takes rather of an overview of the situation of our district and in also New Zealand. So I'll refer to that overview and then some specifics relative to it. Okay?
Yes.
Like you all, I do realise the TCDC 2020 plan was designed before COVID-19 hit us. So I'm trying to take that into account as I speak. I've done a careful perusal of the TCDC website and the last detailed finance statement I could access. And I have to say it did not convince me there is justification of a 10% rate increase in the coming year. When I peruse something like that, what I look for is significant detail regarding projected income and expenditure and where costs can be limited or reduced. And more particularly, I look for the reasoning behind any increase of costs or continuity of projects. So such an analysis includes, of course, cutting out of the budget.
Yep, Murray here, Bruce. Sandra just had to go to the...
Is I on again?
Yeah, you're on, carry on.
Sorry that wasn't me. So what I really look for is reasoning behind any matter that's in the budget.
Yeah.
And that analysis includes, of course, cutting out of the budget non-essential activities, and already that's been named carefully in others' submissions, the whole question of re-evaluation. And so we need the detail. We need actually to see the reasoning, and we need to see innovation, and we actually need, in this current environment we're now pitched into, courage, not only from the council, but from all of us. Now, the 2019-20 budget has 17% of income allotted to council costs. I have not been able to locate a breakdown of the 17% into dollar figures. This may be that I haven't accessed the right part of the presentation, but I do look for dollar figures for staff, community board and councillor costs and salaries, costs of administration, and not least, consultancy costs, fees paid or anticipated. And it would help if all ratepayers, I would suggest, if this information was more readily available, particularly consultancy costs. Also, it would offer ratepayers impressive leadership if the council and senior officers at this time offered to reduce their salary by a reasonable percentage, as government and some councils have, and also have reconsidered levels of rating. Further, cost-benefit analysis could be brought to bear on two issues particularly. One I've mentioned in passing, the use of consultants needs to be minimal, with the council upskilling present staff who have potential and only hiring new staff. It is absolutely essential on a case-by-case basis. And the second point would be contracts for work. Local, competent and licensed contractors should be given preference if their quotes are within budget, and this would apply to building, mowing, and so on. The arrival, the arrival of COVID-19 has, as you all know, huge personal, community, and tourism consequences. In my opinion, the effect on tourism, tour operators, hospitality will be long-lasting. Practical outcomes for the TCDC budget may seem rather mundane, but could include delaying unnecessary work on car parks related to tourism, roading and toilet blocks related to tourism, where there has in the past been high tourist usage. You will be aware that many ratepayers have less income in this time. So I ask you to take this into account into your decision making. And I ask you just to consider these points as you reevaluate what you have in the plan at this time and its budget, because we're all traveling into a complex and unknown future. So let's thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Bruce. Any questions of Bruce? I've got one, Bruce, and it's a similar question to what is asked from the two previous submitters. Where do you stand on the money we put into a lot of grants and all those things in these times?
I think they'd have to be percentage reduced.
Good point.
So
are there any other questions?
You're not going to look at the quality of spend, just percentage reduce?
I think that's a discernment you have to make, and timings will also be part of it. How essential as it is now, and how it can be delayed without subverting the project entirely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Murray. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Sandra. Bye for now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Bruce.
Okay.
Now we're on to, thank you, Murray. So we're on to Jean McCann, page 285 of your hard copy, or page 297 of your online copy. So Jean, welcome.
Welcome. I can see myself now. I value the other submissions that I've heard this morning, and I value this chance to actually talk to my own. I've made two. One is a personal submission, and the other one is on from the Tairu Residents and Ratepayers Association.
So we'll take the Tairu Residents and Ratepayers Association first, if you don't mind, Jean. Is that all right?
Could I do it the other way around? Because my personal one is very simple.
Okay, well, if I just tell the councillors the numbers for the other one, page 137 of your hard copy, or page 139 if you're online. So for your online copy. So 137 is the first one, and this is Jean's in her private capacity. Thank you, Jean.
That's exactly right, because some of the points I obviously might cover. First of all, I'd like to say that I really value the work of the TCD staff, the ones I've had dealings with, and the management that goes into that. I found them very competent, very helpful, and very efficient. Particularly for my own personal, where I've had 2 sewage leakage next to my property, where they've come to sort that out. Other areas that I've been affected by. I'd like to talk about the governance, because I know, and obviously we're looking at before the COVID lockdown, and we're looking at it now. From my own personal point of view, I do have, as Ian said in the very first submission, it comes down to a matter of trust. I was really concerned that that the blowout of the budget was not actually notified to the electorate when it was already signalled earlier in, I think it was September last year, and we voted without actually having any idea that this was happening. And I know that Sandra, you did say that it was unforeseeable, but it had come up at a meeting last year. So it is a question of a bit of a trust, and why the 10%? I feel the same as everybody else, that it's really important that the budgets are stuck to. And as I said in my own personal submission, we the ordinary ratepayers like myself, who are on fixed incomes, do not have that money. And it is, I've worked out, obviously, with the rates, the current 10% increase of over 3,000, my husband and I and a couple of rates on the superannuation, it's going to, the superannuation as it stands, and that's obviously not going to go up. The rates with a 10% increase are going to take over a month of our superannuation. And as I can't remember which submitter roughly pointed that equates to about 150,000 in the bank just in order to pay that. And most of us are on fixed incomes. We are asset rich for those of us who own our own houses, but we are cash poor. And particularly with investments going down. So I'd like to actually just make that point, that it is quite a financial hardship, and I know you're aware of that. But that was the point that I made when I made my submission. With the COVID, obviously things have changed, and I know that the whole governance is going to have to be looked at very carefully. And like many of the other submitters, I plead with the council to actually relook at each of the budget items, ask whether it can be making sure that they have the full report on each of the costs, and ask if it can be delayed into the next annual plan, so that the residents and ratepayers on a fixed income don't have to be hit with a 10% cost. And I've heard the questions about what can be cut. I think that that the most essential things, as I said in my submission, are the infrastructure, reliable provision of water all year round, the mown verges, and I think the points that have been made, I also brought up. The fact that the use of consultants pushes costs up, and I'd like to see a lot of local people being used far more. The other thing that we are going to be hit by, and as my personal submission, is the increase in the costs of the user fees. And I know that it says increasing user fees to better reflect the costs, but with most of us on fixed incomes, just the 39% in official refuse bags, and 80% in 80-litre wheeler bins, all of those costs are coming back onto the extra costs to the ratepayers. even green waste going up by 64%. All these costs that end up on the individual need to be looked at very carefully. And I have great faith that the councillors will sit down and really review these costs, looking at particularly with the COVID-19 and the financial effect it is having on everybody.
Yep.
That's my own personal submission. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Jean. So shall we ask questions now of you in relation to your submission?
Yes, I'd rather
Okay.
keep the two separate. Thank you.
Very well done. Thank you very much, Jean. Does anybody have any questions of Jean? There be none? Okay, Jean, sorry, if you could now address the forum on behalf of the Tairua residents and ratepayers, page 285 of the hard copy or page 297 of the online copy.
Now, on this submission, I obviously speak for the Tairua Resident and Ratepayers Association, and we again have, we are totally opposed the proposed 9.98% increase in rates. We hosted a Meet the Candidates on September the 14th of September. You, Sandra, were there, and Terry Walker. And it never came up that this rates increase was even, or even such a high rates increase was even considered. And I think we should have known these things before the last local election. The other concern from the Ratepayers Association is the fact that how could this huge financial mismanagement have occurred? 12 million, and then now I think predicted 16 million. There needs to be, as other submitters said, an accountability within the financial department to keep within those budgets. The ratepayers, the residents and ratepayers cannot actually hear sound on the words. Sorry, I can hear a background sound. I don't know where when the council, it's better, when the council were aware of that particular budget blowout, but I know it was, I think it was signalled in before the elections. So it really is of concern that we feel we've sort of lost the trust. You've lost our trust in terms of what was said before we actually went to those elections. I also feel that that the costs, other councils are bearing the same sort of increase in costs in waste disposal and infrastructure, but they haven't put their rates up as much as that. And the TCD rates are obviously much higher. I think we're one of the highest of the territorial authorities. So it really is of a concern to me and the ratepayers. The other thing is that the CEO, Rob Williams, actually predicted that with our high rate of retirees in the district with a lower medium income of only 23,000, it was going to, it would be quite a lot of financial hardship. And he also signalled that with the increase, with the huge amount of money that's earned within the district and reliant on the tourism, that we'd be very vulnerable to economic downturns. So I know that this, the budget, the 10% increase was proposed before the COVID-19 lockdown. But I do feel on behalf of the Tairua resident and ratepayers that we actually cannot accommodate at this present time with our employment structure, particularly in Tairua and Pānui, many of our businesses relying on that tourism trade, that we actually need, that we can't accommodate the 10% rates and increases, and the councillors really need to actually think very carefully about how we can cut the budget so that we actually can reduce that 10%.
Is that the conclusion of your submission, Jean?
Yes, I think you've all got it in front of you, and I know you've read it, and I do hope, on behalf of the Taura residents and ratepayers, I do hope that council seriously look very carefully at, and I'm sure they will, at the costs that can be cut. I know you've asked one of our Taura residents, Bruce, about how to cut costs. Again, it's going back to the essential infrastructure. Our stormwater here definitely needs working on, as does some of our sewerage systems. And there are what we need and what we have to have and what we would like to have need to be actually clearly worked out. And I know it's not going to be an easy job over this next year with the COVID-19, but I hope we can trust council to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jean. Are there any further questions of Jean? There being none, thank you very much, Jean. Really appreciate you being part of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Okay, take care. Right, now we have Wayne Carter, page 318 of the hard copy or page 330 of the online copy. Wayne, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Mayor Sandra. Good morning. Thanks very much for having me join you this morning. Thank you. Good morning also to your fellow councillors and fellow submitters. Look, I've got a purpose for addressing the meeting, and it's really about encouraging the council to embrace some contemporary ideas and practices that permeate most New Zealand businesses and global businesses, because I think if we're able to find a way to do that, we can really make the future of the council and what we're trying to do sustainable and realistic, but not just for the council, not just for the region, also for our ratepayers, whether they're business ratepayers or private ratepayers, for the employees of the council and elected members. In other words, everyone could actually end up with a win-win situation here. So my approach today is really more strategic than it is, to address what I think where the real answers are, as opposed to getting too much into, or any point into getting into sort of detail. I'm trying to avoid that on purpose, and there's been a lot of people covered a lot of specific things, and quite rightly so. So very high level, but my motivation, quite frankly, is that we've been ratepayers in the area for 35 years. It's a home that we have in an area that we come on holiday. Now that I'm semi-retired, we come a lot more. But what I've observed, quite frankly, is just this compounding effect of rates in excess of CPI year after year. And you know what? That is just not sustainable. And what actually bothers me is that there's no indication for me as a Joe Bloggs ratepayer that there's any line of sight to that problem in the way the council acts, or the face of council doesn't demonstrate that concern. So I don't think, this sounds pretty dramatic, but I don't think council is seeing the collision that's coming because of this divergence. Yeah, so that's sort of my opening position, in terms of the submission. But you know what, with my age and stage, I've, through a combination of self-employment of many years, and then being CEO of some large New Zealand companies for well over 20 years, I have to tell you, I've faced many, many severe challenges in my life. And I really believe that we can actually, I think there's some answers inside the way council operates today, that we can actually get to a point where there are real opportunities for us. And you know what? I know a lot of people have talked about the present challenge that we have in New Zealand around, this virus that's crossing the world. But I actually see the issue as fundamentally in council anyway. ironically, I think this whole COVID thing actually could work to our advantage. Rather than be doom and gloom about it, it could work to our advantage. And I'll actually come on to why I think that is a real possibility. And so I think we can navigate our way to a really bright future, but just by being brave, and someone used the word about courageous before, if we can be a bit courageous, we can actually work our way through this. So look, I'm really conscious of time, and I don't, because I've been in business all my life, I don't presume or pretend to know how council operates and the sort of strictures that we have around, all the various, sort of stakeholders, I suppose, whether they be government or local bodies or whatever. But I've actually sort of, I'm wanting to inspire the council to actually make some really, really big decisions and take decisive action. And the way I've constructed it is, I'm not in the business of telling anyone anything because I know very little because I'm on the outside. But what I have structured is some questions. Now, if this was a business, and quite frankly, I believe it's a business, if I was in this business, what would I do, or what would I encourage my team to do to actually set about on a course to address some of the challenges that we have on an ongoing basis? And of course, we know that we've got a very big one sort of over our shoulder at the moment, sort of fully emerging. But I thought it was really insightful, Sandra. I thought it was really insightful, and just the questionnaire itself was, and the way that was constructed. And I'd never seen one of these things before, so that was I was learning as I was going. But I actually saw two questions, and one of them said, "Do you have any suggestions on increasing revenue for now or in the future?" And then the second one was, "Can you tell us about increasing user fees to better reflect other costs?" I've got no problem with those questions, but I thought it was really telling that they were questions about how can we grow revenue, but actually not looking in the mirror and saying, actually, what is it that we can do about the current model, the current way we operate? So turning to my questions with those sort of things in mind, there's no question from what I've learned that all modern and successful businesses have realised that a really clearly articulated purpose is crucial to have a really successful business outcome. Now, do we as a council, this is my first question, do we as a council actually have a really clearly defined, previously argued and bashed around purpose for what TCDC stands for and where it's going? And I'm happy to take questions, but I'm also happy to go offline at any other time to expand on some of these things. But purpose, I can tell you, drives inspiration, aspiration, gives guidance, gives clarity. It helps people know what their job is, where they're going. It helps us, all the various stakeholders across the community, know what the purpose of the council is. And every time we make a decision where we're going, we say, is that aligned to our purpose? So that's what I think is really fundamental to this council. The next sort of high level or visionary question that I've got is, when did council last conduct a genuinely strategic review of the business or of the operation from an end to end, and where was the independent peer review that came with that? So I'll leave that as a question. And then my last sort of really high level question is, do ratepayers serve the council, or does the council serve the ratepayer? Or is it something else, maybe like a partnership or whatever words are appropriate? Then by the way, Sandra, is the CEO with us today?
No, I don't believe so. So I'm just jotting things down if I'm not looking at you.
Yes, I'm
because to me that's.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like he's here.
Oh, great! I'm delighted.
Here and listening to it
because.
Sorry, Rob, I wasn't sure. I haven't scrolled to see who's all here, actually.
Yeah, well, I had no clue. So well done. Pleased to meet you, Rob. The sort of questions that I would have thought that the board, or if you like the elected members and the CEO would be asking next as a group of questions is, what services are unconditionally essential to what we do? And therefore, what services are discretionary? Now, I've heard some questions around this morning several times. And, frankly, if we knew that as a council, both for our elected members and for our people who lead the council and operate the council, that would be a big, big help, I'm sure, for making valuable decisions. What value does each of those services add, and to who? Another question. Has the council, who at the council challenges decisions, whether they're essential or they just add no tangible value? Who is authorised to say why? Why are we doing this? Those are the sort of questions I'd like to see. And then I want to come on to revenue. So surprise, surprise, revenue is important. It's really important. It's how businesses survive and how they live. If we don't have revenue, we have nothing. So I think it's important. But the questions I've got now, these are really tough questions. Is the structure that we have at council in line with these services that we said were essential? And how do we measure it? What financial impact does, say, 25% more efficiency bring? Does anyone know what more efficiency is? I'd love to have that discussion. What impact does 25% productivity improvement bring? You notice I'm moving right away from revenue here. I'm looking at the other side of the coin. And what does 10 to 30% less people mean? I don't mean that's a number that we have to take. What is the sensitivity around having 10% less people or 30% less people or any other number? But I think we should know that. And then, does council ever embrace independent, business savvy, experienced or technical experts, not consultants? Just have a couple of people they can ring up and say, mate, what do you think of this? You've got experience in, I don't know, water storage or business management or whatever it is. What's your thoughts? What would you do? That to me would actually give, I think, some wonderful insights. You don't have to take those things, but it's just a thought. And then lastly, from an operational point of view, and trust me, I have a lot more questions, but I'm conscious of time and keeping focused. But does council actually have a champion, a change champion and an innovation champion who actually questions the things that we do and brings about change? Remember the Kodak story? I mean, everyone knows the Kodak story. That's a classic case of, just keeping on doing things the same way and expecting a different outcome. And then the second question, and from an operational point, is there, if there is a revenue shortfall, and I'm only thinking about revenue, you're not cost blower. If there's a revenue shortfall, what actions does council take and how fast? Like if next week, suddenly all of our rates, 10% of our rates weren't being paid, what would the actions of the council be? Would they manage to budgets? Because budgets by then would be gone. Or do they manage to a 10% less income? And then the last couple of questions is what is the employee culture of TCDs like? Is it, what's the ownership of their roles like? What is the responsibility that they take? And in closing, I would love to see our council leaders, and I'm talking about a broad spectrum of leaders, think like founders. Think like they started the business, like they own it. And I recommend council reacts and acts really decisively to make real change. Anticipate the worst and plan for the best outcomes. I want to thank you for your time and hope that helps. Any questions are welcome.
Well, just wondering, Wayne, if you're willing to be part of a pro bono think tank then?
Absolutely, I would love to. I mean, I do mentoring and business advice nowadays anyway. And I know you're joking, but I'm really happy to do it.
Well, I'm only half by joking because I think there is some potential, and I really like the idea for people that have expertise in certain fields, particularly with regard to infrastructure, and particularly if they've got engineering qualifications. But often there's a lot more to the picture than what appears. And the other part of the equation is the constant changing of our responsibilities with government putting more onto our shoulders, such as climate change, emissions targets, biodiversity, national policy statements, things like that. There's a whole range, and then the constraints of contracts, etc. But what's your contact number? You better text me or email your contact phone number. I better throw it open to questions though.
Happy to do that.
So anybody like to ask Wayne some questions?
I'd just like to say, Sandra, through you, that thank you, Wayne, for that. Was a very interesting conversation, and obviously we've made a few points that were put down, and look forward to some more discussion down the track. So thank you for your submission.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep.
Murray,
I've got one.
Murray, then Robin.
Yeah, Wayne, just want to say I think that's the best submission of the day, and getting us councillors to think we where we are and where we're heading. Thank you for your submission. I really appreciated it.
Welcome, Murray.
Right, Robin?
Yeah, mine's an actual question. So in your submission, the things that were, you talked about the non-essential services, those needed to be stopped. And then you've just had three other words, which I'd like you to expand on. Stop the climate change distraction. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I think, this is a personal view, of course. That's all I can give you. But I try and measure that with what's best for New Zealand overall, because, we live here. I really do think that we run a risk of being sabotaged and perhaps channeled into one specific area that just happens to suit a particular environment at the time, and i.e. climate change. I mean, I think we all recognise the climate is changing. The how or why or where is not for me to comment on. But I think the point is we can get really sabotaged by that. And it's a little bit like, then you introduce the challenge around this virus that we've got. That's yet another sabotage, if you like. But we've also got a core business to focus on. Can we make sure that that core business is strong, effective, and delivers what it's supposed to deliver on, in terms of its purpose, but not allow ourselves to be sabotaged by one or two particular other agendas, because we can actually give that some attention, but it has to be commensurate with the amount of availability of resources and time and outcomes that we can get. I hope that answers your question as best as I can.
Not really, but thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Robin. Are there any other questions of Wayne? There have been none. Wayne, please just send me your contact details if you wouldn't mind. I was actually quite serious about that, and I really appreciate your submission. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, so now people will, Diane Connors, page 231 of your hard copy or page 243 of your online copy. Diane, welcome. You right there, Diane? Just have to unmute your... Hello? Right, it would appear that Diane has left the meeting. Has anybody got any... Oh no, here she is, she's in the meeting. Diane, are you with us? Do you want to unmute to be able to join the meeting? All right. Does anybody have her contact number to give her a call?
It's Martin here. It looks like she's still in the meeting and unmuted, so I don't know why we can't hear.
She's unmuted?
Yeah, we will try and find some details for her and give her a call and see if she can join the session later, perhaps.
We'll try now. And because this is the end of this session until the next session. Is this the end of this session? No, we've still got more people, haven't we?
We have more in the afternoon, but we don't have a number for Diane, so we will need to track one down for her.
Hang on.
This happened to me in the last meeting as well. If you remember, you guys couldn't hear me. I went out and joined again, and that fixed the problem.
Yes, that's true.
It's Sally here. I have her number and I'm ringing her now.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Sally.
It's just like turning it on and off again.
Which is fine.
Okay, so how about...
She goes in and goes out and comes back in again, Sal. Oh, here we go. We've got a message from her. I've unmuted myself, but not working your end. Have you let her in, Ariana? Or
yes, she's in. I think what we're going to do is what Robin has suggested. So we'll just wait for a minute.
Rightio. Oh gosh, now I've put myself out.
Sally here. I've talked to her. So shall I, Ariana, have you got her number?
No, I don't, Sally.
So I will give it to you and you can sort it out. So how's that sound? I'll
It
text
sounds
you
good.
now. Yeah. She's ready. So if we could sort it quickly, we could do it now. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have the girls give her a call. In the meantime, I'll leave it with you, Sandra, if you want to take like a 5-minute break or something.
So she's the last one for this session.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, look. How about if we come back at the 2 o'clock session and she's first up?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that lead if everyone's happy with that. We will organise
or
that.
else, depending if she can come in at any time between 2 and the next session, between 2 and 4.
Yes.
Just check that she's going to be available, that's all.
Yeah.
So she's just messaged us and she said it works for her.
Oh, okay. What works for her?
I think the time. The time.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
just following the
that's
chat.
right.
Yeah.
Rightio. So we'll do that. So we'll just see everybody back here at 2 o'clock. Is that correct?
Everyone.
Can we remove this, stop this meeting, close this meeting down and restart?
That's right, Terry. You'll close this meeting and you will go to the 2 p.m. session and you will open that meeting.
That's right. So we're now closing this meeting, everybody,
Okay.
and reconvening at 2 o'clock. And Diane will be with us then.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you heaps, everyone.